So let us pray. O God, our times are in your hand. In the midst of uncertainty, lead us by your never failing grace as we seek to be agents of healing and hope. Walk with us through difficult times, watch over us in danger, and give to us a spirit of love and compassion for those who suffer and mourn. And finally, remind us that you have promised never to leave us, so that even in the valley of the shadow of death, your love may be felt. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So it is my honor and privilege to get to welcome Race Hodges from Episcopal Relief and Development. Katie Mears is joining us in spirit today as they had another meeting to attend to, but helped us prepare this webinar, and it has been walking with us the whole way through our recovery from Helene. So Race, I'd love to turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. Hi, everyone. My name is Race Hodges. I'm one of a handful of people at Episcopal Relief and Development that focus on supporting communities impacted by disasters across the United States. Of course, we do international work as well, but my focus is on domestic disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. I'm so thankful to be here today. I've been working with Kelsey and supporting the Diocese of Western North Carolina with the Hurricane Helene recovery, but have collectively worked with hundreds of communities across the country that are navigating disasters, learning how they can recover, and also how they can help their neighbors and their communities with recovering from disasters in the months and years that it takes. Um, I've been with Episcopal Relief and Development just for a short time so far, but have worked in this space for about 20 years with organizations like the Red Cross, FEMA, um, different state governments, as well as the Peace Corps. So I'm thankful to be with you today and looking forward to just being with you and sharing some information and also learning from one another today. So thanks for having me, Kelsey.
Thank you, Race. I can't emphasize enough how lucky we are and blessed we are to have Race at Episcopal Relief and Development. He has been a tremendous mentor to me as I am learning day by day how this all operates and works. And so, Race, thanks for being here and being with us. And I'm Kelsey Davis, and I am many things. I have a beautiful family. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. My wife is named Heather, and I have two kiddos named Noah and Owen. And I have the privilege of serving as the bishop's deputy for disaster response and recovery. My disaster response and recovery career, if you will, started on September 27th. I think similar to most of us. And my heart and my head and my hands just were led in this direction. And so I'm so grateful to get to be in this work with each and every one of you and to steward the resources that have been shared with us as we, as a community, look to recover and also to prepare because unfortunately, this is not going to be the last disaster. And so preparedness is super important. So Race, turn it back over to you to share about disaster cycles with us.
Yeah, so I wanted to start by just sharing and talking about these two different graphics that are on the screen. A lot of different organizations try their best to think holistically about disasters. And if we look on the graphic on the left-hand side, um, oftentimes, that conversation starts before a disaster even hits, with preparing for disasters. And right now, at the beginning of August, we're about to get into the height of hurricane season. It's so important that we're thinking about how we can be prepared. And I would invite you to think about the idea of preparedness at a few different scales. What does it mean to be prepared yourself? What does it mean for your family or your household to be prepared, or your neighborhood, or your community, or your church? There's a lot of different things that if you think about the scale of being prepared, you might come up with different ideas for what that looks like. And I know that there are three active systems in the Atlantic right now. Hopefully, they're going to peter out and take a curve and dissipate in to the ocean. But we all need to be really prepared for what uh, what an active hurricane season might look like. And Kelsey's going to share some more information about ways in which we can be prepared. And I'd invite you to just think about that. And what can we do to support our neighbors, ourselves, our fellow congregational members at our church with being prepared. There's a lot of things that we can do, and Kelsey's going to dive into that. But then moving clockwise on this graphic, you'll see that big yellow square right there. That's when that disaster happens. And disasters can take different forms, whether it be a flood, a wildfire, a chemical spill, a hurricane, an earthquake. But the idea is that there's going to be that shock in that moment that calls us to respond. In that response phase, that initial response phase is often it involves us. What are we doing if we're located in that impact area? Are we evacuating? Are we sheltering in place? What are the first responders doing? Your local fire, police, EMS. Oftentimes, those are the very first responders helping people that are in need. And then once the situation is stabilized in that in those first hours, days during response, then we kind of shift into that long term, that short, mid, and long term recovery phase. And this can often take many months and years, depending on the scale of the disaster. When we have a disaster like Hurricane Helene, it's going to take many years to recover from that. It takes a long time to rebuild homes, to rebuild damaged roads, destroyed bridges, clear all of the debris that may have been caused by a disaster. And recovery does take a long time to process. There's a lot of different players involved with recovery. Of course, there's the individual, their family, there's local governments, state, federal governments. There's different nonprofit groups, all that offer different things, and we all work together to understand how we can collectively support the recovery from disasters. But we're not quite done. So we've gone through this cycle of being prepared. A disaster hits, there's response. We work through that recovery phase, but then we also have to think about mitigation. And another idea for the word mitigation is that how can we prevent another disaster from occurring, or how do we lessen the impact if a disaster does occur? And there's a lot of things that local governments are doing in this regard. So if they know that they're at risk for flooding, they may choose to do infrastructure projects to reduce the impact of that flooding. But there's a lot of things that individuals or homeowners or churches can do to reduce future impacts from flooding. So this idea of mitigation is really important because if we think and we understand our risk, then we can take steps to reduce that risk. And when we so that's the idea of this graphic about disaster management. And what we're going to talk about today is a bit on the preparedness side of things. And as I mentioned at the top, I'd invite you to think about being prepared at different skills. At the individual level, your family, your household, your neighborhood, your community, your church, and have those conversations and a little list of things that you can do practically to be prepared for a disaster that you may be concerned about. All right, so I want to jump to the graphic on the right hand side. And this is something that we created at Episcopal Relief and Development called the emotional life cycle of a disaster. Um, I know from experience, and I know all of you know this from experience, but disasters uh, cause a lot of emotional impact as we are, working through them as a community. So if you look at this graphic, um, it sort of goes on sort of like a time scale. So starting on the left-hand side, you see the pre-disaster. So this is before a disaster hits. Um, you might have a warning. Some disasters we are able to see them coming, like a hurricane. We can sort of monitor that. We can anticipate if uh, the impacts of a weather event may be particularly catastrophic. And so you might have a warning piece where there's some warnings going on, and you're kind of humming along. But then all of a sudden, there's that impact, and you see the drop um, in the line there. And what that signals is that there's that emotional impact. We're getting flooded with adrenaline. We're oftentimes having to deal with what that means. If our homes are flooded, if we're in an active rescue phase or a life safety phase, there's that definite impact on what we are experiencing emotionally. In the days and weeks after a disaster, oftentimes community members will come together, and there's this really interesting phenomenon where we're all working together to help our community respond. And emotionally, in my experience, so when my family or myself or my home has not been um, too negatively impacted, when we're all working together, there's that sort of hero phase, and we're feeling really good, and our emotions are kind of on a high, and we're riding that adrenaline, and we're feeling really good about coming together and helping our community respond and recover from disasters, and we're feeling really good. After a while, though, we kind of reach the peak of that phase, and that's that peak in this graph, that honeymoon phase, and in and then all of a sudden, community groups start to leave. They think the recovery is over. That support that's been helping us during that heroic phase is gone, and people start to get a little burned out. And over time, in the months and kind of at the 1 year mark, sometimes in the 3, 4, 5, 6 month mark, we start to fall down on this dip of becoming disillusioned and really, really tired and burned out. And we often reach a valley in our emotional life cycle, which is that really low valley here on the graph. Um, and that's often a really serious low point for a lot of us. It might mark the 1 year anniversary of a disaster. We just like we're coming to terms with this being a new normal of our community. We're struggling to find resources to help our community recover. And it's really just the lowest of the low period for us. And then you start to see that increase in our emotional life cycle where we're working through grief, and we're coming to terms with what the new normal is. And it's a struggle. It's an uphill climb, and we're trying to find that energy, that spirit to help us climb through what we're dealing with emotionally from this disaster. And oftentimes we have to manage and deal with triggering events. When that heavy rainfall event comes, it can be a triggering event. Oh, I really hope we don't have another big flood. Or when that 1 year anniversary comes, it can cause a lot of trauma to manifest emotionally for us. Um, but we're constantly trying to work back up uh, to that reconstruction phase where we're trying to understand what that new normal means for our community. And over time, there's been a lot of interesting psychological research into how we process emotions during disaster. And this is a common process, a common emotional cycle that many people experience, many communities go through when they are dealing with disaster. And so, because I know we're approaching the 1 year mark for Hurricane Helene, um, some of you may understand this. This may resonate with what you've experienced. Um, but I think the idea is that it's very hard to manage this independently.
Mm,
And when we come together and when we rely on each other, we can support each other through navigating the difficult emotions that disaster brings. So we often share this with communities that are experience disasters for the first time so that they know what to expect as they navigate the trauma and their emotions during the life cycle of a disaster. So we wanted to start just by sharing this with you. Um, it might generate some thoughts or some reflections for you as we continue to recover from Hurricane Helene.
mm.
So Kelsey, I'll pass it to you for the next slide.
Yeah, thank you so much, Race. Really appreciate that. And just to name too that with the emotional life cycle of a disaster, I personally use this chart to check in with myself, just to create a true, honest dot where I am on any given day. So although the progress of time might be look linear, it's okay if you find yourself at different places along this line at any given moment or any given day. So just to use it as a check-in point, a reference point, but ultimately to be gentle and gracious, with yourself, wherever you find yourself. So just want to share some notes on household preparedness. We will have these slides available, so don't feel like you have to furiously write down everything that we're about to share with you of some tips. So here's just some important information to keep in mind as we start to frame household preparedness. As Ray said, on that individual, household, familial, church, and community scales, sort of just thinking about it as concentric circles. So from the household scale, wanting to have some large waterproof containers to actually build out your emergency kit. So a safe, nice, watertight place to store all the items that we're going to talk about. Copies of important papers. And this is important. They need to be hard copy and electronic copy. Contact information of your family and friends, including at least one out of state contact. This was important to us in Helene that lost our grid. Cash, that old school thing, just hard cash. My family now has about actually $300 um, stored away just in case. If cash is something that is not readily available to you, the suggestion is, even if you can tuck away just $1 or $2 a week, just to have some extra cash on hand. Spare set of keys for your house and car, and knowing where that spare set might be is important. And then a hard paper map of your location and area, and to open up that map and know the routes and roadways around your local area. Copies of credit card numbers, really any sensitive information that would help you, ID cards, replace lost or stolen cards in case you lose your wallet. And again, the copies though stored in a secure place. If you're able to memorize an emergency contact phone number or two, I feel like for my generation in particular, this is an important practice of not relying on our cell phones as the directory, but actually having a number or two in mind by memory. And yeah, in case your phone is ever broken, missing, or stolen. Knowing your infrastructure of your home. So where are the shut off water valves, the power and gas? Being able to turn off these utilities and not have to solely rely on the professionals to come and do it will help with safety. Backing up computer files on cloud storage. And most of all, I think having a conversation with your household or family members, I would even say your immediate neighbors, about what you might do if a disaster happens when everyone is at home, and making sure that you know your neighbors to the right and to the left and across the street from you, so that your first point of contact with your neighbors isn't immediately following the disaster. I know that's a lesson that I learned post Helene, that for me, some of my first contacts with some of the neighbors on my street was after the hurricane. And I'm grateful that we got to be in touch with each other. And I'm trying to make it a practice now to say hey to more people more often, so that we're a little bit more familiar with each other, so that I know my neighbors in case anything else happens in the future. So this is what can be included as a baseline for an emergency kit. These amounts are allotted for one adult. So if you have more than one adult or children, and or if you're a caretaker, or if you just want more quantity to be able to provide for your neighbors and friends, just keep this in mind, that this is for one adult. So food, you definitely want at least 3 gallons of water. There are actually, water containers that are in boxes that can be stored, I believe some of them for up to 10 years. And so those are good things to have on hand. Cans of food that you like to eat, that makes sense for your culture, for your household. That will be something that's tasty for you and that would still taste good cold if there's not the availability to cook. A can or two of fruit and vegetables, again, that makes sense for you and your household. Some snacks, some beverages that you might like to drink beyond water. This is particularly important. Electrolyte powder and electrolyte solution is really important, especially in hot environments where we might sweat a lot and need some electrolyte replacement. So sometimes folks can get themselves in trouble if they're only drinking water. So having access to an electrolyte replacement, whether that's through a sports drink or the powders that you can put in to your water, is really really important. Some comfort foods. I know that we have some candy and chips and you know chocolate. It might melt by the time we get there, but if it's clumped together and edible, we will have it as a family. Some eating utensils. There's some really cool camp and backpacking metal utensils that almost function kind of like a utility tool that I would highly recommend if you're able to grab those. And of course, plastic or metal backups are fine too. A manual can opener. I cannot tell you how many stories I have heard of folks who only had a plug-in can opener and there was no power or no power source. So a good manual can opener is super important. For thinking about health, again, this is for one adult. A week's supply of medication and vitamins, any health items that you personally might need, including, K95 masks and gloves and hand sanitizer. What we saw in post Helene was, the mud became toxic, the dust became toxic, and so airborne hazardous stuff can happen. And so having access to some K95s is really important alongside, a first aid kit. toiletries for sure, any menstrual products, and I would say at least one roll of toilet paper. Keeping that toilet paper in a plastic bag is also very important in case any moisture gets into your emergency kit box. It would be a sad day to pull out toilet paper that's already wet and not usable. So keeping that sealed is a good idea. Again, health continued. In case it's cold, some warming items. And in case it's rainy, some extra dry items to stay dry. Definitely an extra set of clothes, especially socks, is really important. Sunscreen and bug spray and lotion, also important to help mitigate for any bug bites or any diseases that can come through bug bites or any rashes from, sunburns. So tools, thinking through tools, a cell phone charger and charging supplies. There are some really cool and great solar options that are available. I just purchased a small solar generator that doesn't rely on any gasoline, but it operates fully from the sun. And I bought a solar ice chest. And so the solar ice chest can plug into the solar generator, which means that we have the ability to keep medications and food cooler beyond the lifespan of our refrigerator, which I believe has about a 3-day lifespan without a power source. So thinking through those sorts of scenarios, basic tools, utility tools, pliers, duct tape is definitely needed in the kit. You can do a lot with duct tape. Pen, marker, and notebook. This came in handy in Helene when we needed to handwrite briefings and updates from the radio and pass them around the neighborhood. We actually pulled cardboard out of the trash can to be able to handwrite notes as well. So just keeping some items around you to be able to communicate, wipes, a whistle, definitely flashlight with extra batteries, scissors, and some matches. I would also include waterproof matches if you have the ability to obtain those. So switching now from household prep to some church prep, high level here. If your church is interested in doing some preparation and planning, highly recommend appointing a disaster planning team and response team. I know that some of you already have, which is incredible. You will be hearing from me in the coming weeks of uh, connecting in with you of how you form those teams, what wisdom and lessons you can share across our diocese in case others also want to form a team like yours. And then once you have that team formed, starting to outline a disaster response plan and the assignment of duties with backups to those duties in case those individuals are not available. And last but certainly not least, connecting in with our diocesan disaster response team with me, with our team members, because we would love to work with you in collaboration as you are designing your team, as your team is figuring out its mission and its duties. We'd love to know that and also to be a support to you in that. So some congregation safety tips, making sure that your parishioner contact list is up to date, both electronically and physically. And then I would say at least 2 people know how to access those lists. Noting particularly who among you has special needs or special skills. So you know who to check on and who to call on. A communication plan, good old classic church phone tree style. How is the list going to be divided up among leadership? And again, having a backup for each one of these folks. An example can be the priest takes a chunk, the deacon takes a chunk, senior warden, junior warden. It can be as simple as that. And we can't emphasize this enough. We talk about this a lot with Race and Katie at ERD, but knowing your neighbors and your local community organizations is one of the primary ways that congregations and that our households can stay safe. We have to do this together. We have to keep watch on each other. And so, already being plugged into your neighbors and your local community organization will just help everything be that much more smooth when we need to respond. From a financial aid and admin perspective, creating a PDF file, making sure um, uh, all of these records have electronic record in case, in case these paper documents are somehow swept away or not able to be accessed. So again, I will circulate this PowerPoint, but things like passwords, the directory, insurance policies, etc. For church building safety, having a chart that shows actually the map of your facility and where hookups and shutoffs exist for the utilities, that could even live next to a fire escape plan. That could certainly live electronically as well. And so just so folks know who's on first, what's on second, what might need to be taken care of when. And it's very important for insurance purposes as well to take pictures and videos of all the areas inside and outside of your property to show the pre-disaster condition. It will just help everything in the insurance claim process if you already have those up to date and on hand. Um, so this is just if you are find yourself in a place where you need to file for insurance, having those pictures or videos again is super important. If you don't go with insurance endorsed contractors, three bids are best practice. And then just of course saving and filing any communications received from church insurance. So Race, I will pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Kelsey just shared a lot of really great information with you all. So it's great to know that the slides will be shared with you afterwards. And yeah, I just love so many things that Kelsey said. I really believe that disaster preparedness starts with you at the individual level, and that list of things that Kelsey recommended be in a disaster supply kit is great. I've seen churches add a handout into their Sunday bulletins, and that could be something that you would like to do. Maybe this weekend you approach your priest and say, "Hey, next Sunday, can we include a leaflet for what we recommend to be in a disaster supply kit?" That could be a great thing for you to do based on what Kelsey shared today. Um, and yeah, so thinking about disaster preparedness, uh, there's a lot that you can do, um, but know that that Episcopal Relief and Development is also here to support uh, uh, dioceses and churches and the community should a disaster happen in the future. For your general information, um, what we at Episcopal Relief and Development usually do is when we are aware that a disaster has impacted a community, we will immediately reach out to the staff at the Episcopal Diocese and check in and say, "Hey, how are you? Um, how was the diocese impacted? And were there any churches, congregations, or communities that were impacted?" Based on what we learn, and should if there were impacts, we often give the diocese a immediate recovery grant, an emergency grant that they can use to help the community, not just congregants. Our funds are not just for congregants; they're for the larger community. And those emergency grants are designed to help with immediate needs. So food, water, oftentimes money, direct cash into people's hands. So it's really important that for those of you that may belong to a congregation that uh, if the bishop reaches out to your church or if somebody else from the diocese is reaching out to understand the impacts that you share those impacts with them. If you have an active, feeding ministry, or if you have a program that we could kind of tack on to help reach people that are in need, oftentimes that is what these Episcopal relief and development grants are designed to do to really help congregations um, get out that money, get out that support, that food, that water as quick as possible to people in need. And those grants are usually the first 3 months after a disaster. But even if you can help earlier on the first 2 weeks, that's really the goal. But then for larger scale disasters, and this is what we're working with Kelsey on right now for Hurricane Helene, are these much larger long-term recovery grants. So at Episcopal Relief and Development, um, these always look different based on the partners that we have and the impacts on the community. Oftentimes, and what we're seeing right now in the Diocese of Western North Carolina are these things called congregational grants. So if there is a congregation that wants to help out, they've come together, they've understood what the needs in the community are, and they come up with a plan for how they want to help the community. Episcopal Relief and Development funnels money to the diocese, who then funnels that money to the congregations, you all, to make a difference and help people in need in your communities. That's a very popular type of program and one that we're actually doing right now. In fact, some of you may be at churches where we're doing this right now to help people that were impacted by Hurricane Helene. And we always want to utilize the gifts that you have in your congregation. So should something happen in the future, you know, sometime in the future, think about the ministries that you have at your church, the people at your church, the relationships that you have, and how you could be most impactful with helping the people in need. Because we always want to leverage those gifts that you have, those relationships, those assets to make the biggest difference. The long-term recovery support certainly thinks about shelter. Do people need money for a new place to live? Maybe they need money for a down payment, first month's rent, something like that. Maybe they decided that I just can't live here anymore and I need to relocate, somewhere outside of the community. That's perfectly fine. A lot of our funding goes towards that. We always prioritize people over place. We want to empower people to make a decision that is uh, based on what they need. So that's a philosophy that we have at Episcopal Relief and Development. Certainly repair. So if they want to hire a contractor to repair their roof, our funding can certainly support that. So those are the two different types of grants that we have at Episcopal Relief and Development for disasters: that immediate recovery and that long-term recovery. And we're in a period in history where disasters are becoming more frequent. They're becoming more intense, and this may be a calling that you have at your congregation to get ready to help your communities recover from a disaster. I'm sure there's a lot that we all learned from Hurricane Helene, but maybe you want to have a conversation with your clergy, with your fellow congregants about how we can be ready to help our community should another disaster happen. And that rolls into number 3 here, which I wanted to talk a little bit about too. So this idea of community-based response. That question that I would invite you to ask during conversations with your clergy, with your congregation, is this question: how can you leverage the gifts and assets of your congregation to meet post-disaster needs? It's really good to brainstorm, have a little meeting that invites people to think about how they get help. Maybe you have a really awesome, feeding ministry that you could use. Maybe you have connections with community groups that are doing really awesome work in the community that you could partner with during a disaster to make a really big impact. There's a lot of different ways, and it looks very different for every congregation. Um, Another thing that I would invite you to think about is as a body of a church, we're called to help those people that are in the greatest need, those people that are living oftentimes on the margins of society, underserved communities that may have challenges accessing traditional recovery resources. Right now in this country, there's a lot of people that are scared to reach out for help. There's some, communities that just don't understand how to get help. And as a church, and as a congregation or a parish, one thing that we can do before a disaster is have an idea of which nonprofit groups or which community organizations in my community serve people that are living on the margins of society. Do I know what those organizations are? Do I have a connection or a relationship with them? If not, think about it. When I think about, what does it mean? What types of community groups are living on the margins of society? Oftentimes those are people living in poverty. Those are new immigrants. Those are people that may not speak English. Those are persons with disabilities, communities of color. They may be religious minorities. Are there community groups that serve those populations that I can, reach out to and say, hi, I'm with the Episcopal Church. We, wanted to form this partnership, this relationship with you. In case there's ever a disaster, maybe we could work together to help people in the greatest need. That might open the doors up to new ministry opportunities, even outside of the disaster space. But it's really effective, and it's a model that works really well for the Episcopal Church when we are trying to reach people that live on the margins of society. When we work in partnership with organizations that are trusted organizations in the community, we can help on a deeper way and really reach people that we may not otherwise be able to reach. So I invite you to ask that question, that second question here under number 3. Does your parish or congregation have connections with organizations that serve historically marginalized and underserved communities? It's always a good idea to make relationships with these organizations before a disaster, just in case, we ever need to really leverage those relationships to help those in greatest need. So that's a little bit about how Episcopal Relief and Development can help uh, should a disaster happen in the future, and also a little bit about how we're helping right now and working with Kelsey very closely to help all of those people that are impacted from Hurricane Helene. So Kelsey, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Race. It's wonderful. So just to finish up here, and then we'll move into questions. Just a few additional resources. So Race had mentioned a leaflet. There actually is one available through Episcopal Relief and Development called A Season of Resilience that is downloadable and printable. I believe it's 5 weeks of leaflet. So that is available online if that's something of interest to you. We also have our Episcopal, our Diocesan Relief and Recovery Hub, where we continue to update resources as much as we possibly can. And so if you have resources that you would like to share with us and with the wider diocese, please just reach out to me. I would love to learn from you and what you're learning and what you know, and to curate those resources together for the wider diocese. And finally, I belong to the Choctaw of Oklahoma, and the Choctaw have a pretty great emergency management team. They've created this video called The First 72 on You that is a visual of essentially what we just talked about in prepping an emergency kit. And so if you'd like to watch a video, I think it's 9 or 10 minutes long. That video is available as well as other resources on the Choctaw Nation's website as well, where they're in Oklahoma and deal with disasters almost annually. So they have a ton of great resources there as well. So we will pause now and open up the room for questions. And I will stop sharing the screen as well.